All right. So welcome once again to the English Language Testing Society's monthly webinar. I'm Michael Fields, your host. I welcome all of you, and today we're going to talk about rubric design. Before we get started, I just have a couple announcements. First of all, more people to admit. I'll keep doing that. First of all, please don't forget our conference. That's the ELTS conference, English Language Testing Society conference. That's on November 8 and 9. That's a Friday and a Saturday. If you go to the ELTS website, you can find the registration. We would also welcome your presentation. So if you'd like to do a workshop or a presentation, please feel free to apply. That would be wonderful. We would love to hear from all of you. The conference is open to members and non-members, so please join us, whether you're a member or not. But I also want to just encourage you now to, if you're not a member and you're here listening to this webinar, please consider membership. You'll have all the benefits when you're a member. I don't know if Rosario wants to say a few words about that.
Yeah, we are welcoming new members all the time, and we are redesigning the way we offer our benefits. So for everybody who registered for the conference, we are going to offer a 6 months free membership. So you can try and see for yourself, and maybe then you can consider becoming a full member with all the benefits that it has, like accessing to our newsletter soon to be published and other publications, along with all webinars and all interviews that are conducted by ELTSociety members.
Right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you so much, Rosario. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I was looking earlier for a survey tool on this version of Zoom, and I couldn't find one, although I always use one on mine. This is not mine. So I'm just going to sort of ask generally, and you can just respond as you'd like. If you want to put something in the chat, if you want to just shout out. And by the way, as I'm doing this webinar, I'm not always going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have a comment or a question, just shout it out. Don't be too polite, please. Okay, we really encourage your participation. So don't worry about not being polite. Just go ahead and shout it out. I'm so happy that anyone has a comment. So my first question is, like, who uses rubrics already? How many people already use rubrics, feel comfortable with rubrics? Laura is kind of waving her hand there. Okay, I'm just scanning through panes. Margaret Van Neersen. Margaret, where are you coming from today?
Pennsylvania.
Oh, Pennsylvania. You look like you had maybe a Dutch name. So I thought
it is
maybe,
a Dutch name.
but you're not very far away.
No.
Yeah. Okay. I'm in Delaware, by the way. So not
All right.
So. Okay. All right. Anyone else want to make comments about using rubrics? How comfortable you feel with using rubrics? What situations do you use rubrics in? I'd be happy to hear from anyone.
Hello.
Yes, Hilaire.
All right. About rubric design, I would say that it's almost new to me. We've started last year with our new English curriculum, which is the CBLT, the competency-based learning approach.
Mm-hmm.
And in it to evaluate or to assess students' paper, the last part, which is, we call it the problem solving. Yeah, that is the writing where you need to put all the criteria into rubric design. Then it's a little bit of a task. And I think I have this great opportunity here to learn more and see how to do it in a better way.
I hope so. I hope so. So, Hilaire, can you tell us, before, so you've gone to a proficiency-based or a communicative-based approach in your
competency-based
yes.
learning, the
And
CBL.
Right. And what was before that? What sort of approach were you using before that?
That was objectives based learning before the CBLT.
Okay. Paula has a hand up. Yes, Paula.
Sorry, because I cannot open my camera. Hi from Costa Rica. I'm from Costa Rica, and I used to use rubrics when I need to have more objectivity in my development, right? And here everyone is, well, I need to know why I have an A or a B, or so I say, well, I'm going to explain you. That's why they need more objectivity in those records, let's say. So I use it just for productive items, just for productive.
Yes. That's right. And that's normally when we would use rubrics, is for productive items. And absolutely, Paula, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm going to talk about the same points that you made, but I'm really happy that you made them first. And by the way, if you're in North America, we call them rubrics. If you're maybe more familiar with European, British English, they're probably going to be called rating scales, but they're the same thing. They're the same thing, rating scales or rubrics. All right. My next question is, how many of you feel confident writing rubrics? And that's really the crux of what we're going to talk about today. So if you don't want to raise your hand, if you want to shout out, whatever you want. How many of you feel like, yes, I can already do that competently?
Michael, I have tried writing rubrics. I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in writing rubrics, but I have tried, and mainly what we've done as a team in the place where I used to work was to look at the objectives of the course or task or exam, whatever that needed rubrics to be designed, and then transform that into rubrics and find ways to assess that, numbers or letters or percentages. So that would be in a broad manner my experience with rubrics, but I'm really willing to learn more about rubric design.
Well, let's see. There's not so much to learn, but let's see what we can do today. And we're going to go through sort of step by step a very general and basic rubric design method. And then there'll be some time at the end for more discussion. But before our discussion, if you have questions, comments during my presentation, just shout it out. Or you can raise your hand. That's fine. I'll probably see your raised hand. And if I ignore your raised hand, just shout it out. So let's go ahead and get started. And let's go back to Paula's point. Why do we use rubrics? What's the point really of using rubrics? They're complicated. They give us something more to do. Well, I was fine before. Why should I do this, right? Using rubrics or rating scales adds validity to assessment because the descriptors provide a construct definition. So right in front of you, you can be sure when you create your descriptors that you are you're explaining to yourself and to anyone who uses the rubric, for example, anyone who's affected by the rubric, for example, your students, exactly what we're looking for on the assessment. And as we mentioned, it's usually used for productive skills, so speaking and writing. Rubrics also add reliability to scoring, both inter-rater and intra-rater reliability. So, if you've ever had that experience of going through a big stack of papers and that last one that you write before lunch, when your hunger is clawing at you, just doesn't get the same grade as the one that when you come back with a full stomach that you might give quite a better grade to. So that's just a very simple example. Or some student that maybe, you know, you don't really like too much. He's a bit trouble in class and you tend to be very critical of him. And then there's your one that you like a lot. Maybe they produced about the same quality of paper, but we may be, because we are human beings, right? We teachers are also human beings. You may be inclined to give that one that you like a better score for what's essentially the same product, right? Or for a variety of reasons, we ourselves, what one person grading might not always give the same score to similar papers. And of course, inter-rater reliability. How do I score and how does Rosario score? I'm just going to pick on Rosario because we know each other. She's on the committee. So let's say I'm I don't know if this is true. Let's say I'm the organization guy. I love good organized papers. Grammar, well, I don't care too much about that as long as students express themselves. Rosario, on the other hand, she's the grammar person. She wants to see everything. She wants to see wonderful grammar. She wants to especially make sure that the grammar that she is taught in her class is shown on the writing, right? So two raters coming from very different approaches look at the same paper. If there's a paper that is not well organized, but has really good grammar, Rosario might give it a really high score, whereas I might give it a low score. And what we're doing there is we're bringing in our own bias. And we would like to eliminate bias from our grading, right? We would like to grade the paper based on the paper and not based on the paper plus my idea, my biases, or not based on the paper plus Rosario's biases. We want to eliminate those. So when we use rubrics and we consider all the criteria, let's see, I was the organization guy, right? Even though I'm the organization guy, I am forced to consider the grammar. I can't just grade on the organization. So in this way, we're using rubrics, we're improving the reliability. And as I said, it helps the teacher see the whole picture. Even if I'm the organization person, I should also look at the quality of the grammar, the quality of the vocabulary, etc., and not only see things through my own colored glasses, right? Rubrics also add transparency because students know exactly what they're being evaluated on. And it's not only transparency in the sense of sort of washback, students know what they got and why, but it's also a way to bring students into a discussion about how to improve their work. If they can see in front of them a concrete description of what they've done well and what they still need to improve. And yeah, and as the next point is that it's a clear basis for feedback. And it also, as students get better, and we hope they get, of course, we always hope our students get better in their writing, it can define the progress because we can see the students moving up through the levels using the rubrics or rating scales. So I just want to give you an idea. So, first of all, about analytic rubrics, there are basically two kinds of rubrics, and we can even argue that there's a third kind of rubric, but there's the two most important kinds are holistic and analytic rubrics. I'm going to be mainly concerned with analytic rubrics today. Analytic rubrics take the speech sample or the writing sample and break it down into different categories. And we try to look at each of these categories individually. There's also something called holistic rubrics, where we take everything and we kind of look at it together. Those would be good when we are not giving feedback. For example, on placement tests or intake tests. We don't need to evaluate every single criteria separately. We want to get a sort of a global picture, right? And it's not important why the student is at a certain level. We just want to place them in that level. Or sometimes if you are grading large numbers of papers and you're doing a final exam the students will never see again, they don't need any feedback. And especially the key here is that you got a large number of papers you need to get through quickly. Might be better to use holistic rubrics. But generally analytic rubrics are better because they break the writing down into different categories and we can evaluate each of those categories separately. And then a third kind of rubric, by the way, is called single trait rubrics. I think we won't talk about that today. So analytic rubrics are better for classroom use when you're doing formative assessment, you're giving feedback, you expect to give feedback, etc. Right? So I just want to give you one set of criteria that I'm familiar with, and you might have different criteria. But I'm going to use the Cambridge ELT categories. And for writing, those categories would be coherence and development, organization and cohesion, structure, and lexis. That's for writing. And for speaking, we're going to be looking at fluency and coherence, lexis, structure, and pronunciation. So we're going to sort of break down our evaluation of writing into these 4 categories and look at how well students can do in each of these categories. As you are developing your rubrics, your rating scales, you might want to use different categories. You might want to add another category, maybe mechanics. How do they do their capitalization and punctuation correctly? Or to what degree are they on task? Or there might be some particular aspect of their writing that you're really looking for in a certain assignment. So something task specific. But these are kind of general categories that we can all use. So here's an example. Here's an example rubric. And you can see that we have our 4 categories: fluency and communication, vocabulary, oral grammar, and pronunciation. This, of course, is for speaking. And we have 5 levels, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll look at what those levels mean in just a moment. So you see, first of all, that these different categories give us the analytic scoring guide. So we can say, yeah, we're only looking at fluency now, and then I'm going to move on to vocabulary. Of course, this is speaking. This is a speech sample, so we're going to try to evaluate all of this at the same time, right? We have to sort of be able to pay attention to all of these things. But I want to think about my student's ability to communicate fluently. How much of his message is communicated and how fluently does he communicate? How about his vocabulary? What's the level of his vocabulary? How about his oral grammar? How well is he, doing with his grammar? And finally, his pronunciation. I just want to go back and talk for a minute about vocabulary and grammar, because we may often think about these things too narrowly. So let's think about them in a little broader way, and that should actually be written into your rubric when you write the descriptors. So when we think about vocabulary and also grammar, let's think not only about accuracy, but also about range. So in other words, we want to evaluate, of course, we want to evaluate how correctly our students are using vocabulary or how correctly they're using grammar. Of course we do. But we don't want to limit ourselves to only how correct they are. We'd also like to approach the evaluation of their vocabulary or grammar in terms of what is their range. How much vocabulary can they produce, even if it's not always correct, right? So in other words, a student who produces a lot of higher level vocabulary, sometimes not accurately, should probably be getting a higher score than a student who plays it safe and only relies on those very basic words. And I think if we only think about accuracy, we might miss that. So let's consider both range and accuracy when we consider vocabulary and grammar. So here are our categories. This is the basis of our analytic rubric. And of course, our descriptors identify linguistic performance. Of course they do, right? That's what we're trying to write into our descriptors, exactly what the performance of a particular student is. These will never be completely correct because real human beings don't conform to nice little pieces of paper, and we know that. So the approach we should take is the best fit approach. These descriptors might not describe exactly what any particular student does in a speaking performance. That doesn't mean that we can't use the rubric. We need to match it to its its best fit. We need to match the actual performance to the best fit of the student. And I think one way to approach this, remember, we should write these descriptors in terms of can-do statements. In other words, what can the student do? We don't want to be punitive in our descriptions. We don't want to write things like, he made 3 mistakes, it's this level. He made 5 mistakes, it's this level. That's a big can of worms. First of all, what's a mistake, right? Not all mistakes are equal. And secondly, we don't want to write rubrics in a punitive way that simply so we simply have something that looks like a rubric, but actually just goes back to that system where we're just saying -1 for each mistake. We don't want to do that. So we'd like to create these can-do statements in our rubrics. What can the student successfully do? Now, let's look at the first level here, level 1. We see these bold statements. And these are meant to convey the essence of what a fail is. So if we see for fluency in communication, the student simply cannot communicate his message. He simply does not express his message. That's going to be a fail, no matter what else he might do correctly. And that's why we're putting it in bold. That's kind of a ceiling, right? In vocabulary is not sufficient to express an opinion or tell a story. So we're assuming here that the evaluation is about expressing opinions or narration, right? The vocabulary simply isn't there. That's a fail, right? For grammar, we're going to notice that not a single sentence is correct. Every sentence this particular student utters has some grammatical errors in it, right? That would be, for this rubric, that would be a fail. And for the pronunciation, in connected speech, in real speech, the message is only partially clear. So we get this effect of like, we understand patches of speech, but there are patches of speech that simply we don't really understand. That would be on this rubric, for this particular class, that would be considered a fail. And please notice that fail doesn't mean he failed the test. It means he only failed in that category, right? That's very important because we're going to average these scores. Please notice that the scores are based on letter grades, and this is, some of you are zooming in from all over the world, and I'm really happy about that. This is based on the US, the North American system. You may have a different system. You may have a completely different system. We have 95 as an A, well, 90 to 100 as an A, but we're going to make that an average. 95 is an A, 85 is a B, 75 is a C, 65 a D, and 55 fails at an F. So that's just the system, that's how it works on this one. You can change that, of course. Please note that if you add half steps, you can further refine your scoring. So for example, let's just take an example. I'm going to give this student a 4 here, or that's going to be an 85, right? And for his vocabulary, he's really better than that level 4. But I don't feel like he's quite getting to that A range, to that 5 yet. So what's halfway between an 85 and a 95 is a 90. So I'm going to give him a half step for this. And then he gets another 85 here. And wow, pronunciation, though, is amazing. So he's going to get 95 there. And then we simply take that average to create his score. And please notice, again, that here is your half step that is just further refining the score. So you can sort of narrow down those grades even more. And one more point, an advanced tip, you can also create ceilings, not only at we have them here at the 55, at the fail level. You can create those ceilings anywhere, and we'll look at some more examples of that in a moment. So any questions about this? Any questions or comments about this? And again, just, yes. Yes. Is that a question? Maybe not. Okay, so let's just look at some points about analytic rubrics. First of all, the descriptors are not assessments. The descriptors are they just describe. The assessment happens when you match your student performance with descriptors. I think that's really important. You're the one that's in control. You're the one that's matching a particular student's performance with the descriptors. And again, we want to try to approach it with this best fit model, because students, just like we are, we teachers we are humans, and so are students, and they're all different. And their performance is probably not usually going to look exactly like those descriptors. Even when you write them and you know your students, you always have surprises. Teachers don't give grades. And that's something I think we need to adjust ourselves to. If you're not familiar with rubrics, and you're really really happy, giving grades, you really feel about confidence about giving grades. I think sometimes, in my experience with some of my colleagues, is that there's a kind of a fear of letting go. Just let go, right? Maybe I'm a Buddhist. Just let go. Just let it go. You're not giving grades. The rubric will reveal the grades. So you've created the descriptors, and so in a sense, you are still giving grades. You're just giving it in a different way, or maybe in a more indirect way. The rubric, when you apply the rubric and you give those values and you add it up and you average it, you get your grade. The rubric reveals the grade. And there are good reasons for that, which we'll look at. So sometimes I hear people saying, well, this essay, I'm thinking about writing here, right? This essay really doesn't deserve this grade. I don't like the rubric system because I saw this essay and it just doesn't deserve this grade. Well, I'm thinking two things. One, are your descriptors off? Are your descriptors misaligned with scores? Remember, you created the rubric, you can always go back and change it, right? Or if you're using a common one for like everyone teaching at your level, you can have meetings, you can have discussions, you can change the descriptors, right? Maybe the rubric wasn't well written the first time. But more often, I feel like in my own teaching environment, I feel like when teachers say this essay doesn't deserve this grade, what's really going on is they are overlooking the successful aspect of the writing or the speech. And they're focusing on the less successful aspects. And they're kind of giving a grade based on the least successful aspects of that.
Frozen.
Yeah, it looks like there was a problem. I hope Mike's will step in again soon. Someone wrote, who is it? Margaret. I like the idea that rubric score will reveal the grade. I like that too.
Mhm.
It's interesting. And
There we are. I'm sorry. I just
see,
lost everyone. Just lost everyone for a minute. I don't know what happened, but I'm back. Don't worry. Okay.
Yeah, I thought you'd be back. Okay. We were just commenting on the idea that the rubric score will reveal the grade.
Yeah, please. If you have a discussion, please, let's hear it.
No, we were just commenting on that. Margaret wrote it on the comment section.
Okay.
I just,
Yeah, please.
we were just all saying that we just like that concept. That's all.
Oh, wonderful. I'm glad someone likes it. I'm actually struggling in my own place of, well, let's say there are many different opinions where I teach about rubrics. Okay. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about how to, I think we're still recording. I hope so. Let's talk about how to create a rubric. So get out your pencil, or at this point, it's probably going to be your computer and your on your Microsoft Word program, that program that makes a chart, right? And let's draw some boxes. That's the first step. Let's just draw some boxes. Let's decide on our categories. Here, I've got content and development, organization and cohesion, structure, vocabulary, and you can imagine this is probably for writing, right? And then third step, let's assign scores that correspond to whatever system you use. I'm going to use the North American letter grade system of A, B, C, and F. Sorry, I think Ndong Haida Ndong Helida, could you mute yourself? Maybe. I think there's some background noise. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So the third step, of course, is to assign some letter grades. Maybe if everyone can mute themselves, I think I'm getting some background noise. Thanks. All right. I'm going to recommend, oops. I'm going to recommend, and there's more than one way to do this. I'm going to recommend that you write your, well, I'm going to call for the North American context, your C range descriptors first. So let's consider, what is the minimum pass? What is the minimum pass? Sorry, if anyone can mute, please. I'm just going to send a message. See if that works. Ah, maybe that. Okay, great. All right. Let's consider what a minimum pass is. And in this case, we've written in these descriptors, and we've even got some ceilings in there. So we see that the writing sample is generally intelligible, adequately developed. It's generally coherent and logically developed. That's going to be our, and this is probably maybe, upper intermediate. That's going to be our ceiling. So if the student doesn't do that, he doesn't get a C or more on the content and development category. Looking at our organization and cohesion, we see again the ceiling. The purpose of each paragraph is clear. So in other words, every paragraph has a central idea, right? And we see that he's used some cohesive devices, and at least and, but, or, but we hope more than that, right? For structure, we see that complex sentences are regularly attempted. It doesn't say they have to be correct, and that goes back to that idea of range and accuracy, right? But at least he's trying, or she's trying, to use complex sentences, not relying on simple sentences. And for vocabulary, we see that at least the general vocabulary, maybe not the academic or the advanced, but the general category vocabulary is used correctly. And there's enough vocabulary, it's sufficient to develop the topic. So these are examples of how we might start. This is our C range for this class. That's your minimum pass. That's what I would be looking for. Then we can go ahead and we can fill in the other. This is my suggestion, right? Start out with that middle one, and then go ahead and fill in the other levels based on what you've got in that middle one. So I think it's easy to go up and go down. And maybe what can help you, what can guide you when you're thinking about these descriptors. One thing, by the way, is if you have samples, if you have student writing samples, and you sort of look at them and you say, well, what's the same? What's similar about all the A papers? What's similar about all the B papers, right? And you can actually you can describe what you're actually seeing. If you maybe you don't have that luxury and you just have to do it through your imagination. But let's use these general descriptors. So my C range is going to be the level appropriate essay or the standard essay. How would I describe the standard essay in terms of content and development, organization and cohesion, structure, vocabulary? And then let's think about the strong essay. How would I describe these categories when I say, you know, this is a strong essay? What about the outstanding essay? If I'm looking at, what am I looking for when I see an outstanding essay? The threshold essay. It's not really where I want it to be. It's not quite level appropriate, but it's not a complete fail. What would I see? And finally, a failing essay. What do I expect to see in an essay that just doesn't pass? And from there, we can go ahead and we can fill in all of those descriptors. And it might look something like this. And because of time, you can see that later if you'd like, but it might look something like this when it's all filled in. And again, we see that there are lots and lots of ceilings in there. Those bold statements give us ideas of what we're looking for at a certain level, and if it doesn't meet that criterion, it can't go higher than that. Now, before we get into our discussion, let's just think of some arguments against rubrics. Lots of people argue, well, I don't like them, I don't want to use them, etc. I already know how to grade my students. I know what I'm looking for without a rubric. What can we say to counter that argument? Again, using a rubric makes grading more transparent. It makes feedback easier. Even if you know what you're looking for, your students might not, right? It's too hard to read and figure out all the categories. It takes too much time. The fact is, with time, as you familiarize yourself with the rubric, it goes faster and faster, and it becomes really a lot easier. And again, it helps you see the whole picture. I mean, I think that's really the important thing. It helps you see the whole picture. It helps you not to grade unfairly. It adds validity, reliability, and transparency. I mean, those are really the keys. And all of these are basically making those same points. The descriptors don't match what my students actually produce. Okay. But you should be using a best fit approach anyway. And if it's a recurrent problem, the descriptors just they're really not working, then try to rewrite them. Try to rewrite them. Maybe the rubric wasn't written well in the first place, so try to rewrite them. So I wouldn't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? Just because the descriptors don't match what my students actually produce doesn't mean you shouldn't use a rubric. It means you might want to reform your rubric. The scores I get with my rubric don't seem right to me. Remember, we need to give up that idea that we are in control and we are giving grades, right? We are using a rubric and the rubrics are revealing scores. So we just need to let go of that control mentality. Again, you might be unfairly assessing problems without giving credit for their achievement. So we might be looking only at the worst aspects of their writing and their speech and not realizing that they've actually produced a lot of good language. And we need to award credit for that and not only sort of reduce, take points off for the mistakes they made. I was doing fine before, why should I change? Well, rubrics are more reliable and valid. Then impression marking is what we call it when you just sort of read a paper and say, well, that's about a 78, right? We call that impression marking. So rubrics are more reliable and valid, and again, more transparent. All right, so I'd like to turn it over to you now. what are some of the advantages and disadvantages of using holistic and analytic rubrics? So I'd like to open that up to anyone. Just shout it out. Let's remember, analytic rubrics are when we break down the descriptors into different categories. Holistic rubrics are when we put all the descriptors into a single category. So we just have a one descriptor that says this is an A, one descriptor that says this is a B, et cetera, et cetera. Any ideas? Don't be shy.
Well, I have a comment.
Yeah.
I find that analytic rubrics are much more helpful for the students and often for the teacher for diagnostic information, but they are also much more complicated, especially when the different criteria aren't weighted equally. So for example, you might want to give more weight to organization and some of the macro skills than you do for, say, grammar and vocabulary, because those are more, or mechanics, for example, because those are more micro skills. And so when you have to start weighting one thing more than another, then you're getting into a little bit of simple mathematics, but still additional work. And so that's one issue that I have with analytic rubrics.
Okay, great point. I have an answer for that, but maybe someone else does too.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I do agree with Sister Cynthia about the analytic rubrics because it gives more detail. I think it also works on fairness grounds. Since the students will be looking deeper into what they deserve as grades. So, but for the holistic rubric, I didn't quite get the details about it. So if you may have any chance giving me more insight in it, that would be nice.
Yeah,
And,
Hilaire, so
yeah.
basically, yeah, the holistic rubric has only one category. So it takes all the descriptors and puts them into a single category. So it says, you know, here are all of our descriptors about organization and grammar and vocabulary. We put them all together and we say, this is an A paper. And another, you know, single set of descriptors, this is a B paper. An analytic rubric is what we looked at today. It breaks them into categories. So I want to answer Cynthia's point, which is a really good point. And if you are not confident about your math and doing weighted averages, one thing you can do is simply, when you're designing your rubric, I'm just going to give some, you know, I don't know if this is all add up. These are just examples, but you can go ahead and assign scores. So maybe this is value of 30 here, and this is a value of 20 here, and this is a value of 15 here, and this is a value of 10 here, and this is a value of 5 here. And if we're not so concerned in this case about organization, let's say we're really concerned about content, right? Then we can make this one worth 15, and this one worth 10, and this one worth 7, and this worth 5, and this one worth 3. So we can go ahead and write in the actual score for each possible combination. And then it's just a matter of adding them all up. But of course, what you want to make sure is your top level adds up. When you add that all up, it's going to come out to about 95. Your second rank come out to about 85, etc. So if, again, yeah, if weighted averages give you a problem, to be honest, I generally I have done this before. I generally like to weight all the categories equally because it makes it easier to calculate the scores. And also, I think I was involved in a big project with our whole department. I think to avoid this problem, because we have varying levels of comfort with that level of math, I think we put mechanics in with another category so that would just kind of get absorbed into that category, and then we could go back to, not using weighted averages, I think was the idea. So there are ways around it. What about when I talked about that a little bit, but does anyone else want to comment on when you should use an analytic rubric and when you should use a holistic rubric?
Michael, I think a holistic rubric would be good if you're doing a lot all at the same time and you don't have a lot of time for each one. But I find that using an analytic rubric is actually really good, especially for novice teachers, because then you're kind of on the same par as the more experienced teachers. You know what you're doing. And also, you have to explain why you're giving the grade you're giving. And the rubric, if you've got an analytics, rubric sitting in front of you, you can say, well, you didn't do this right and you didn't do that right. And it's much easier than if you sit down with a holistic rubric and they say, well, tell me, what did I do wrong? And you're like, I have to go back and grade it again now because I didn't make note of that. So I think holistic rubrics are good maybe for formative assessment throughout the course, perhaps, but definitely for a summative assessment, then an analytic rubric would be much better.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, and again, as Beth said, things where students will never need any feedback. Intake testing, large groups that are doing final exams, you're giving them this kind of formative assessment, and they'll never see it again, right? That's when using a holistic rubric is a time saver. But usually analytic rubrics are better. In fact, I saw a study that looked at single marking and double marking. The best possible combination is to use an analytic rubric and have 2 markers. And when the markers agree, or of course, you're never going to agree entirely, but when you're in one band of each other, you just take the average. When you're more than one band out, then you have to discuss the paper and come to an agreement. So the best scenario is when you have 2 markers using an analytic rubric. But then what about 2 markers using a holistic rubric or 1 marker using an analytic rubric? And the study I saw shows that even if you're not double marking, that using the analytic rubric is going to give you more reliable results. Even if you're single marking, using the analytic rubric is going to give you more reliable results than double marking with a holistic rubric. So sort of your order of reliability would be double marking with analytic, single marking with analytic, double marking with holistic, and single marking with holistic. That would be, yeah. Great. Let's go on. Should I focus on task-related descriptors or linguistic descriptors? When you're writing your rubrics, should you think about your particular assignment and write the descriptors to reflect that particular assignment, or should you use more general linguistic descriptors? Anyone? I'll be happy to hear anyone.
Michael, I would say that if your course focuses on certain learning objectives, then of course your rubric needs to focus on some of those aspects. So for example, if you're teaching writing and compare and contrast, you want to make sure that you have that in the rubric, that they've used that. Or depending on what kind of writing they're doing, whatever the features are of that particular writing, that it's included in the descriptors, so that you're actually assessing what you're trying to teach them. So yes, I would say they shouldn't be too general. I think it depends on what the task is. If it's a particular teaching thing, then yes. But if it's just a general writing, then maybe the general descriptors would be better.
Okay. Anyone else?
Doesn't it just depend on the nature of the task and the goal of your assessment? as to whether, I don't know. And then based on that, you can decide on how much of the linguistic aspects, which are the parts of the task are linguistically most critical, or where linguistics comes in and most critically affects the success on the task. I don't, I'm rambling.
Yeah, so I really appreciate, well, Margaret, you sort of hit the nail on the head here saying it may depend on the kind of writing. I really appreciate Beth's comments. I'm going to disagree with them, and that's not to say there's no right answer about this, but I would come in, and we've had in my place of where I teach, we've had lots of long discussions on this question, and I'm on the other side from Beth, and I want to first of all, I want to validate Beth's comments. I really do, because there's no right answer. I think each side has its advantages and disadvantages. And again, before I tell you what I think, I just really want to validate Beth's comments, because they are, I mean, absolutely, those are all very, there's nothing wrong with what she said. I sort of come in from the other perspective. I try to focus on the linguistic descriptors because those don't change. And that allows me to use one rubric for whatever level I'm teaching. I can use one rubric, and the students are familiar with that rubric. So they have certain goals that they can work towards. And the linguistics, which is what we saw in these examples, I mean, the coherence and cohesion, the grammar, the vocabulary, those sorts of things don't change. But what I do like to do is leave, there's one other category that is task specific. So I will leave a sort of a blank set of descriptors on my rubrics, and I fill those in according to, as Beth said, like if you're having them do compare and contrast, you want to see them do that, and you want to see them use the right language to do that. So what I like to do is leave one category blank and be able to write those in according to the assignment. But for me, and this is just my opinion, I'm bringing my own bias here, and if you think the opposite, that's wonderful, really. But I tend to go on that, the linguistic side, not on the task side. But as I said, I do include the task. I leave a space for that. Anyone else have an opinion? Please feel free to disagree. There's no right and wrong here. All right, let's look at our next discussion question, which is very similar. Should I have a different rubric for each assignment, or one rubric that I use for all major assignments? Anyone want to weigh in on this?
For the sake of practicality, it would be better to use the same or similar rubric for all major assignments. But then again, depending on, and there is someone mentioning, for example, presentations, Christine, she's mentioning presentations here in the comment section. And probably, yes, if you're assessing presentations, then you would need to have something more specific for that specific assignment. But in general, I would go with using one same rubric or similar rubric for all major assignments.
Yeah, that's kind of what I tend to do. And again, with that category that allows me to focus on something that might be particular to that assignment. Now, I just want to emphasize, I really want to emphasize here, these are questions, these are really good questions and common questions that come up in these discussions. There's no right and wrong answer. So if the right answer is the one that works for you on all of these questions, right? But there's such common debate points about rubrics. Anyone else have an idea?
Yeah, I would add, though, that if you are teaching a particular skill and you're administering some kind of an achievement test to see if they've mastered that skill, then the rubric needs to focus on that skill. So, for example, if you've been teaching summary writing, then the rubric should be focused on summary writing. And maybe it doesn't matter quite as much if they've got a spelling mistake or a grammar error, because what you want to capture is whether they know how to summarize a text.
Yeah, and let's add to that. That's a really good point, Cynthia. And I just want to add to that, if for those of you who are sort of aware of the CEFR and the latest developments, the 2020 companion guide of the CEFR, where they've sort of reorganized everything, and we don't talk about reading, writing, listening, and speaking anymore. And they make a distinction between production and mediation. I think Cynthia's making a really good point, where your sort of average essay in class, sort of what we often have our students do, would be an example of production, where students are producing their own language based on whatever skills they have, versus, as Cynthia said, a summary, or it could also be a synthesis, would be good examples of mediation, where there's some linguistic input that's mediated by the student, and then it's turned into some kind of linguistic output. And when we do these kinds of assignments, when we ask students to do these mediation assignments, what we're looking for actually changes. So when we do these mediation assignments, part of the assessment should be to what degree their representation is factually correct, right? So as Cynthia's example of a summary, if the student wrote a grammatically amazing summary, but it got all the facts wrong, Cynthia, how would you grade that?
Probably not very highly. Unless I don't know. I'm not sure. I think depending on what the objectives were, like if they've followed the criteria for how to summarize a text, they would score more highly than regardless of the grammar. Right? As long as the grammar makes sense. If I couldn't understand what they were trying to say with the grammar, then of course that would be a problem.
Right, but what I'm saying is, what if they gave you a summary that looked really good in terms of grammar and organization, and they followed all the instructions about how to do a summary, but it was factually incorrect? In other words, they're not demonstrating their ability to read.
Well, if the goal is to summarize what they've read, then it wouldn't score very highly.
Right. And that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. So this is a mediation task where they're mediating input in order to produce output, which we should see as different from a kind of original writing where all of the output comes only from them, right? I just wanted to make that point because I think a lot of people might not be aware of this relatively new concept of mediation in language production. Yeah. We have time for, I think, one more thing. So I just want to go back to checklists. And if anyone's familiar with these checklists, here's an example where we're going to say, we can say, each of these points on this checklist about content, organization, and language can be answered with a yes or a no, or there might be a sort of in there too, right? Maybe, yeah, you did this right sometimes, but sometimes you didn't. So what about checklists? What do you think? How can we use checklists, and how are they different from rubrics?
Maybe I can use checklists for formative assessment. I mean, no grading involved, and students see where they need to improve or what they need to focus on.
Any other comments?
Does a checklist take it to the student and have this? Is it easier to have the student think about what they need to do rather than giving them reading a label or a rubric? I'm looking at the first part on the content. Is your paper is the content and that puts it back into them. I don't know. Yeah.
Again, there's no right and wrong. I'm going to agree 100% with Rosario here. If you don't agree, that's fine. I use these. This is one of mine, by the way. I use these in early drafts of student writing. So they can compare it's sort of like a rubric in that we are comparing production to a set of criteria. In this case, I ask the student to do that himself or herself, compare this criteria to their writing
Mm.
and see how much they've done well and how much maybe they haven't done well and need to go back. So in my case, and you might have a very different way of doing it, but I would use this for non-graded assessment of a draft, but the final draft would then be graded with the rubric.
Mm. Interesting idea.
We use this kind of checklist before, and then the grading sheet looks almost exactly the same but has points assigned.
Okay.
So that it's not really a rubric because it doesn't describe a range of performance, but it does have it broken down so that and then we would comment if the answer was no, we would comment on that particular question in the final grade sheet.
Right. Well, thank you, everyone. We're almost out of time. I just want to remind everyone that we have our conference coming up November 8th and 9th. Please join us if you can. I think that's a Friday in the daytime for here in North America. And I think if I remember correctly, and then Saturday, more of a sort of an evening in North America. Please join us. You don't need to be a member. We'd love to see you. We'd love to hear a presentation from any of you. We're also encouraging membership. So please, if you enjoy what's going on now, consider being a member and you'll have access to every part of our society. Next month, there's no meeting next month because next month is the conference. So actually I'll see you in December and we're going to do an item writing workshop. So thanks for listening. Thanks especially for participating. And please come back in December for our item writing workshop. So thanks everyone. And
Thanks, Michael.
all right. Nice to see you. Nice to meet everyone. Nice to
you.
see some familiar faces.
Thank you, Michael. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, see you all.
All right.